For some feds in acting roles, time is nearly up. Next week, the Trump administration will hit a deadline that covers officials acting in jobs that are supposed to be filled by political appointment. The Vacancies Act puts that deadline as 300 days from Inauguration Day. That's November 15th for the Trump administration. Steve Goodrich, CEO of the Center for Organizational Excellence, writes about the problem in Government Executive, a piece called "The Top 10 Silent Killers of Government Efficiency and Effectiveness." Steve, thanks as always for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
You have these barriers to success listed in no particular order, but I wonder if the two at the top might not apply to this issue of the lack of political appointees. Those are politics and lack of capacity. Politics, in some cases, keeping people from joining the administration, and the lack of capacity, since those folks aren't there, keeping execution from happening the way it should.
Well, these are barriers that, while they exist, we're not interested in trying to stop reform. In fact, I list them in order to find ways to dissolve them and move forward. You're absolutely right about those top two. Because we can, Congress can initiate a program but not fund it, for example. Things that get in the way. OMB, for example, has a big charter, but not a lot of folks with the right expertise to help move this forward.
Another one on the list is a loss of focus. How do you see that manifest itself in the world that we live in today?
We see it time and time again over the years. The administration that we have doesn't matter. You have GIPRA, for example, where agencies still submit their reports. No one's paying attention to them. We have president's management agendas that, as the administration wanes, the lack of focus starts taking place, and things don't quite get done because nobody's at the helm watching it.
Another item on your list is a narrow view of reform. And as I read what you wrote about it in the piece at GovExec, I think of this as the kind of go big or go home mentality, where folks really aren't thinking maybe as big as they should be when it comes to reform. That's the reason you're a big fan of OMB Memo 17-22, isn't it?
I'm a big fan of 1722 as long as it has sticking power. And that's part of making sure we have the resources. But going big, going home means taking a holistic view of reform. On your previous segment, you were talking about IT reform and getting the strength of technology, which is absolutely necessary. But government tends to put in new technology and forget about policy, forget about improving the business process. For example, making sure the people are prepared.
Another challenge in that case is compliance rather than execution. We talked about that with FSMA, where essentially there's a perception, at least, that FSMA became a check-the-box exercise, and that fits in, I think, to another item on your list, which you write as misguided accountability. And it strikes me part of that is people maybe chasing the wrong goals, i.e. compliance instead of actual execution success.
Well, we don't always, you're absolutely right, we don't always focus on the right goals. And then what we want to do is check off the box on performance management, when accountability is really about see it, own it, solve it, do it. And everybody in government, from the bottom to the top, if they take that mentality, if they focus on really what needs to be done, then they can work together collaboratively to make it happen.
You write, as just about every person who writes in this area does, about the lack of focus on culture. Another item I talked about a moment ago with Dave. And the challenge really here is changing a culture that's existed probably since the civil service became a thing in the 1880s. That's a really hard rock to push up the hill, Steve.
It is, and especially in a political environment that has turnover quite often. But culture is the way we work together to get things done. And it's the leadership's responsibility to define and set the culture that's expected. If not, there's a vacuum that's created. And vacuums are always filled. It may not be filled with the thing you want. So a very hard focus, and not just on change management, but defining a culture that's expected within the organization and driving that forward through performance, through training, through expectations, all the way through the measures we have.
Another item is the ineffective procurement practices. We could probably do the whole segment on challenges to the procurement system. It strikes me, though, that one of the efforts that the administration has really focused on is trying to drive change in order to make it easier for agencies to get the stuff they need so they can get out of the procurement business and be more in the mission business. Is that a fair observation, do you think?
I think that's somewhat of an observation, but again, it gets to the change question, because you have a cadre of procurement officers throughout government that you have to bring along with that. Category management, for example, is a great idea. But one of its principles is that the procurement officers working on it are knowledgeable and skilled in the product or service that's coming along. And I don't think we've made that transition yet. I also see a tremendous difficulty across government with the lack of partnership between program offices and procurement on getting the job done and getting it done well.
We have about 30 seconds left. What do you think will drive most of the changes here? Will it require more of a carrot approach from the administration or stick approach, Steve?
I think it requires both, and I think it requires a Hill and an OMB that's willing to drive this, taking the hits where they may, but also having the strong leadership to make it happen. I'm in favor of term appointments to make this happen because I think they're generational in the making, not something you can do in a 4-year term.
Steve Goodrich, thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Francis.